Major funding for The Pulse is provided by a leadership gift from the Sutherland Family Charitable Fund. The Sutherlands support WHYY and its commitment to the production of programs that improve our quality of life, and by Cancer Treatment Centers of America in Philadelphia.
This is The Pulse, stories about the people and places at the heart of health and science. I'm Mike and Scott. This week, I got a new appreciation for fat, the kind that tends to annoy me, makes it hard to put on pantyhose. I got to see it up close in a lab.
So right now, I am going to focus on some fat cells in the microscope so that you can see how they look.
That's Evangelia Bellis. She is a bioengineer at Temple University. She runs this lab, and she looks at health issues with the eye and training of an engineer. She studies how fat cells from different parts of our body act differently, why some become inflamed and cause problems, and others don't. She's grown these fat cells we're looking at herself from stem cells.
And you can actually see all these little lipid droplets that have formed within these fat cells. And so that's what actually stores the fat for us. Are those lipid droplets. So you'll see they look like little clusters of grapes.
Oh, wow.
Adjust the focus if you need.
They're beautiful.
Aren't they?
This would make like a perfect pattern for a couch.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Before I toured the lab with Bellis, I sat in on a research meeting, and one of her students presented about a study on fat cells done by another scientist.
Role in the cellular function and behavior.
And then Bellis pointed out an important criticism of that study, which was done on mice and humans.
But what they didn't spend much time on is talking about the gender of these animals and the people. There are gender differences in our fat pads and how our fat behaves.
Bellis often finds herself making that kind of point. As a woman in bioengineering, she's a rare species, and she says that is unfortunate.
Everybody brings a different perspective. And then, if women aren't represented in bioengineering, then how are we then thinking about women's issues? So if we're thinking about women's health care, if we don't have women to bring up the point that we should be studying X, Y, and Z that's related to women's health care, we won't be doing it because our voices aren't heard. We just need that balance. We need that other voice.
So on today's show, we're going to listen to that other voice. The voices of women scientists doing groundbreaking work in fields like chemistry, biology, astrophysics, changing the game while often overcoming barriers. Let's start with a woman many of us know as a novelist, Zora Neale Hurston. She wrote the 1937 classic Their Eyes Were Watching God, but she was also an anthropologist with a pioneering research style. Her goal was to embed herself as much as she could, to be an engaged participant in the communities she researched, not just an observer. Ponce Rutsch, the host of the podcast Babes of Science, profiles the scientist Zora Neale Hurston.
This little song is a story. The young lady thinks that it's time for them to get married. In fact, she thinks they just have to, and the boy doesn't want to marry. And so this song is about it. Till I lend me your pigeon to keep company with mine. Till I lend me your pigeon to keep
Zora Neale Hurston spent years collecting folklore in the southern U.S., and then she performed some of the songs. The recordings are archived at the Library of Congress.
I got a rainbow wrapped and tied around my shoulder. I got a rainbow wrapped and tied around
This is a work song. The part where Zora exhales is where prisoners would pound rocks, or the railroad workers would drive a spike to secure the rail.
Yes, sometimes they sing 30 and 40 verses. It's one of these things that's just grown by incremental repetition until perhaps it's the longest song in America.
These folk songs and stories were rarely heard outside of the Black South. The idea that they might be just as culturally important as white stories? Well, it's a surprising suggestion for the time, and Zora becomes one of few anthropologists willing to assert that it's true. Zora Neale Hurston might have been born January 7th, 1891. Or 1896, or 1897. She later claims different ages, depending on who's asking, and because if she calls herself a teenager, she can keep getting an education. She and her 7 siblings live in Eatonville, Florida, an all-black town outside of Orlando on 5 acres of land packed with citrus trees and chickens, and plenty of time to think and play. The only white people in Eatonville are visitors, and Zora sits on the front porch, watching them pass by. She later writes that the front porch was her gallery seat, and on her boldest days, Zora would hop down and ask the white folks where they were headed. You can almost see Zora, budding anthropologist, starting to find her passion. A smart, precocious child who so easily stepped over the color line, Zora's boldness must have frightened her family and neighbors. But she writes that she was their Zora nevertheless. Somewhere between 5 and 10 years later, she moves to Baltimore. She gets a job and takes night classes, then enrolls in high school. She's 27 by the time she earns her diploma, an age when most women would be marrying or settling down. For a black woman in 1918, raised with Jim Crow and segregation, finishing high school is a big deal. But Zora wasn't done yet. Zora becomes a part-time student at Howard University, a historically black college in D.C. She goes to class in the morning, works at a barber shop in the afternoon, and studies at night. One of her short stories gets published. It's about a young black girl who's filled with this boundless sense of joy. And people respond, because the idea of a black person being happy, it's pretty unusual in 1920s literature. Zora becomes part of the Great Migration North, and when she steps off the bus, right into the Harlem Renaissance, she has less than $2 in her pocket. But she's a published writer. She works as a secretary, and by fall 1925, she earns a scholarship to Barnard, where she studies anthropology. And in her research, Zora documents exactly what she hears. The dialogue is packed with slurs, and one word runs right into the next one. And that makes some of her critics not so happy. W.E.B. Du Bois, part of the black elite, says that Zora's language makes black people sound primitive. Not helpful, he says, to those who are trying to improve their standing in society.
They conceive that their fight is simply to have the same rights and privileges as other American citizens.
At Columbia University's anthropology department, Zora works with Franz Boas, sometimes called the father of American anthropology. He's pushing his students to place themselves in the center of what they study. And Zora? She's already there. Her first serious fieldwork expedition is back home in rural Florida. But Zora's changed since she last lived there, and it isn't all that easy to slide back in. She wears a nice dress and drives a car. She calls it Sassy Susie. Zora later says that she was speaking in carefully accented Barnardese, maybe sounding a little too much like this. Pardon me, but do you know any folk tales or folk songs? Zora fails to embed herself, and as a result, people don't want to share their stories. And the stuff she collects disappoints her. So Zora heads back to New York, and there she finds a new fan, Charlotte Osgood Mason, a wealthy socialite and philanthropist. Mrs. Mason offers Zora financial support, which Zora needs, but Mrs. Mason's money comes with strings attached. She gets to decide how and when Zora's folklore makes it to the public. And as a patron, Mrs. Mason expects the black people in Zora's writing to have this cloying sincerity in the way they live and behave. Zora heads south to Eatonville again, and this time, she has more success. She goes to parties and makes friends with a lady named Big Sweet, who shows her the best storytellers and keeps Zora out of trouble. She puts herself right in the middle of the community, and this time, she collects first-rate folklore. After that, Zora expands her research to New Orleans to study spiritual practices like hoodoo and voodoo. To earn the devotees' trust and respect, she goes without food for days and lies naked near an altar for 69 hours, learning how to communicate with spirits. And Zora doesn't only feel respect, she feels this sense of urgency to collect the history of voodoo, as she put it, before white folks ruin it. Zora's fieldwork becomes 100 pages of research in the 1931 Journal of American Folklore. And then she signs a deal for her ethnography, Mules and Men. It's a book of Zora's detailed first-hand research infused with her reflections. The book reads like a collection of short stories, but it's anthropology. But soon, Zora is losing interest in the formalities of academic research. She pursues and then drops out of a PhD program, and then she applies for other funding. In 1936, Zora wins a Guggenheim Fellowship to study magic in Jamaica and Haiti, more voodoo. Zora embeds herself again and learns about vegetable poisons and antidotes. She goes on a wild boar hunt, and she writes that she's there when a chief medicine man silences every frog in the jungle with his mind.
They're great song makers, and their tunes are decidedly more African than the ones made by the Negroes in America. They make songs so rapidly, they say...
Working in Haiti coaxes out Zora's most famous novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. She returns home to publish it, and after that, she more or less settles in the South. She works with the Federal Writers Project next, collecting more stories.
And Mama don't want no peas and no rice. It's about a woman that wanted to stay drunk all the time, and her husband is really complaining about it. He's explaining to the neighbors what's the matter with his wife and why they don't get along better. Mama don't want no peas, no rice, no coconut oil.
Zora continues to write until her death in 1960, although she has to take other jobs. Even if she lives modestly, writing isn't enough to support her. There are people who might question if Zora is indeed a scientist, but what makes a scientist anyway? Zora started on her porch in Eatonville, making observations, one of a scientist's most important tasks. She published her research in anthropology journals, and Zora's books were her way of reporting tales of Black life. She picked a medium that would speak to masses of people. So she's decades ahead of open source science. And if we want to talk peer review, Zora definitely had her critics. One of her most popular critiques was, "There's something missing here." Critics couldn't find the misery, the bitterness, the smoldering resentment of Black people. And they wanted to know why Zora's characters were so carefree. Maybe Zora already saw that perspective, documented meticulously by others, and she wanted to uncover new perspectives on Black people, increase the sample size. This is all to say that Zora's contributions to anthropology were less biased, or at least differently biased, accounts of Black life. But maybe the best argument is this, and Zora said it herself. Research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose.
That was Ponce Rutch reporting. She hosts the podcast Babes of Science. 80 years after she began documenting Black life in the South and decades after her death, Zora Neale Hurston continues to be an inspiration to modern scientists. Among them, Robin Nelson. She's a professor at Santa Clara University in California.
Zora Neale Hurston is perhaps one of the most influential anthropologists to me as a Black woman anthropologist. Zora worked in and out of obscurity. She worked in and out of poverty. And I often tell students, there have been people paving this path for us for a very long time. And so when you feel defeated, know that there are people who've worked very hard before us, and we can do this standing on the shoulders of people like Zora Neale Hurston.
We'll hear more from anthropologist Robin Nelson later on. She'll talk about her own research documenting harassment. You're listening to The Pulse. I'm Mike and Scott. Our show today is about women in science, their groundbreaking work, the challenges they face. And here's a woman who broke down major barriers to succeed in a male field, astrophysicist Vera Rubin. As a scientist, she changed our understanding of the universe when she proved the existence of dark matter. And as a woman doing this kind of work starting in the 1950s, she challenged gender roles and what people thought women could and should accomplish. She died in December of last year, and I recently spoke with one of her 4 children, Princeton geology professor Alan Rubin, and he told me that around the dinner table, the family often talked about the obstacles his mother faced in her work.
I was in middle school, junior high, we called it then, probably around 1975. She was invited to give a lecture to the Washington Philosophical Society, which held its meetings at the Cosmos Club. And in 1975 at the Cosmos Club, women were not allowed to walk through the front door. So there were a lot of dinner time discussions about what she would do. In the end, I think she actually walked through the side door and gave her lecture. I, in the end, was pretty surprised. I think that was uncharacteristic of her to back down to that extent. I was advocating that she walk into the front, up to the front door and tell them she was a man and just walk on through. But I'd say this is the one time that I can really remember where she backed down.
What do you remember her general attitude to be toward those things? When I'm reading about her, it seems to me she would just say, well, that's just silly. It's stupid to treat me differently because I'm a woman. But how did she talk about those things at home, how her male colleagues treated her at times, how there would be no bathroom for a female person? A lot of things, big things and small.
Well, at times she was angry. I think she was very angry at the slow pace of change. She grew up in Philadelphia. She applied to a lot of Penn and Swarthmore, a couple of Philadelphia area schools. At the Swarthmore interview, when she told the woman that she was interested in astronomy, and the woman said, "Well, what else?" She wouldn't take that interest seriously. My mom said, well, she was also interested in art, and the interviewer asked her, well, have you considered a career, drawing astronomical paintings or paintings of astronomical objects? And this sort of turned into a running joke in the family. Have you considered painting astronomical objects, kind of thing. So when they're far enough in the past, they turned into something of a running joke. But when they continued into the 70s, it wasn't so funny anymore, I think.
Did you have any sense how extraordinary your mother was when you were a little boy? I mean, I'm imagining you going to elementary school, and probably everybody else's mom at that point, or a lot of them, were stay-at-home moms, right?
Probably, but the answer is no. I didn't understand until I left home just what sort of a name she had made for herself. To me, she was my mom. I remember when I was a postdoc, somebody introduced me, this is Alan Rubin, his mother discovered dark matter, and I turned to him and I said, no, she didn't. And it's because it was, really taking me. I grew up, I'm a scientist, and most things in scientists are not discovered by one person, and in fact, dark matter was not discovered by one person. But that was my initial response, that she's not the discoverer of dark matter. She is my mother.
How do you think she saw herself, both as a scientist who did big things and also as a woman who did amazing things, especially in making a path for other women?
What she most liked to do was observe the heavens. That was certainly much more important to her than, whether she got this award or that award. Trying to make the paths for the next generation of women astronomers easier, that was also a big part of what she did. I suspect she was prouder of that. That took a little more guts. I think she recognized that she had some responsibility to push for women scientists as well, but maybe a little more reluctantly at first.
But it sounds like she was a woman who did things rather than talk about them.
So I remember the story. She was teaching at Georgetown until about 1965, and then learned, maybe a few years before that, that someone at Carnegie Institution in Washington was building an image tube, something you could attach to the telescope, and spectra that used to take a couple days to complete could now be done in about an hour. And it just opened up a whole field of study to possibilities, including what she was interested in. So she really wanted to get a job there. She was afraid that the people at Carnegie were too close to the people at Georgetown, the astronomers where she was teaching, and she was afraid that if she just walked in and asked for a job, they wouldn't offer her one because they'd be afraid of offending her colleagues. So she says she quit her job at Georgetown and then walked across town, or drove across town, to Carnegie and asked for a job. This, I guess, is the lesson that I wished I learned from her, and maybe I've learned, but to a much lesser extent. If you see what you want, just go out and do it.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and I also want to say I'm very sorry for your loss.
Well, thank you.
Alan Rubin is a professor of geology at Princeton University. His mother, Vera Rubin, proved the existence of dark matter. She died in December of last year. This is The Pulse, stories about the people and places at the heart of health and science. I'm Mike and Scott. We're featuring the work of women in science on today's show. And this week I went to a couple of different labs that are run by women to talk about their work, the challenges they face. And I met Marie Kurtz. She is a geochemist. She studies the chemical composition of our natural environment. And she runs a lab at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. They test water from the Delaware River for pollutants. Marie Kurtz is the boss, and she has 4 other women working in her department.
This is Alana. What are you doing, Alana?
So we just finished up a run on the GC, so we're storing these and archiving them.
Okay, so these are samples of...
They're samples that we extract fish tissue, and we're looking for PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, the concentration of them. We report the concentrations of PCBs, and then they're able to put out a report about how many is safe to eat.
Kurtz told me it's unusual to have so many women working in one lab, and there's a phenomenon that geologists and other people in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, call the leaky pipe.
Women drop out sort of progressively the whole length of their career. There's no one spot where women really drop out. It just happens every step of the way, so it's the leaky pipe. And I remember talking once with one of the professors at University of Florida where I did my PhD, and I said, but look at this, we're more than 50% women in the grad program, like it's just a matter of time, we just have to move through that pipeline and eventually that'll change. And she said, well, I thought that as a grad student. When I was a grad student, there were more women in my program, and we thought the exact same thing. It's just a matter of time until we become professors. Now she's a full professor, and she's still one of 2 women in a 20 faculty department.
Why women drop out of these STEM jobs is a topic of a lot of discussion. And a few years ago, a group of female researchers decided to investigate one potential reason. They had heard again and again, anecdotally, that women were experiencing harassment while doing research work out in the field. So they decided to launch a study. They asked scientists and students to participate in a survey, and they got over 600 responses, mostly from women. More than half of those who responded had experienced sexual harassment in the field, and almost a quarter had been sexually assaulted. I spoke about this study with one of the authors, anthropologist Robin Nelson, and I asked her to first explain to us what it's like to be out in the field.
It's a very intimate setting. So for field researchers, the field is a professional space. And I think that it's hard to imagine that with our common folklore around people like Indiana Jones. And you have this idea that it's this kind of swashbuckling adventure, but it is actually a professional space. You show up, you either camp somewhere or you have a place where you live. You often are living in very close quarters with other people, with the other researchers, and you spend all day together working. You eat your meals together and you sleep in the same spaces. And your responsibility as a researcher during that time is to get accurate data and to get as much data and to make sure that you use your time efficiently. So it's a high pressure, high intensity professional workspace.
It also sounds like a place where you could be very vulnerable.
Absolutely. So because of the nature of the research, it's very in-group. Everyone there is generally working on the project, and everyone there is very focused on the kind of team dynamics that are guiding the process. So that if there are violations of the rules, sometimes it's not clear how to deal with them.
From the responses you got back, could you give us an example of what happened to people out in the field?
In some cases, people were actually harassed and assaulted, physically harassed or verbally harassed and assaulted in the field. There were also, more subtle kind of power dynamic challenges where, it's not clear when folks were going to stop at the end of the day. The idea was that it's a kind of a test of physical feat, like how long can you go doing a hike or on the dig. There were also situations where males and females, women and men at the site were asked to do different kinds of work. I think that we cannot know how many people were turned off from pursuing field research or turned off from just following through with their career goals due to either having witnessed or having experienced sexual harassment and assault.
Did you ask people whether or not they reported what happened to them?
So yes, we did. And very few people reported, and fewer were satisfied with the outcome of that reporting mechanism. One of the big trends that we found, both in the initial survey of 666 people and then in the follow-up long form interviews that we worked on with an additional 26 people, were that the reporting mechanisms were not necessarily clear. Folks were not always clear about who to tell when something was wrong or who that person should then report to. So how they could then follow up and make sure that their report went somewhere. That was all very ambiguous in many, many cases.
Since your report came out, has anything changed in terms of how universities deal with this? Has the conversation changed?
The conversation has changed. There's been, a bit of a national conversation amongst researchers about how to set appropriate ground rules for field research. This has included everything from having students read our initial publication and similar publications in journal clubs before they go off to the field, to the production of codes of conduct that can be handed out to field schools, and asking students and all participants at all levels of the professional hierarchy to sign off and reflect on the fact that there are rules of appropriate professional behavior in these spaces. What I really want to see more of, and I have seen quite a shift in this, is that more senior people recognize that this may be a bigger problem than they think, and that they need to take proactive measures to make sure that their field sites are safe.
Robin Nelson is a professor of anthropology at Santa Clara University in California. This is The Pulse. I'm Mike and Scott. Right now we're talking about the opposition women sometimes face when they are entering science and tech fields or when they are trying to rise to the top. Reporter Alan Yu introduces us to a game developer who spoke out about sexism in video game culture, and then she became a target on social media.
Brianna Wu has loved video games ever since she was little, playing Super Mario 2 on her Nintendo Entertainment System. She grew up and went from playing games to making them, but somewhere along the way, Wu says she noticed the problem.
We're an industry that always portrays women as like, damsels in distress, or the girlfriend that's been kidnapped, or, the hypersexualized sidekick.
For example, Wu's favorite character is a warrior with a magic sword from the fighting game Soul Calibur. Her name is Ivy.
But then as sequels kept coming out, her boobs got ridiculously big and her costume kept getting smaller and smaller.
So Wu did a Kickstarter campaign and created her own independent game called Revolution 60. It's a science fiction adventure.
Women are every single part of the cast. We are the hero. We are the sidekick. We are the commander. We are the engineer. We are the villain.
As a player, you're a spy who gets to save the world by regaining control of a military space station.
In Revolution 60, there's not a single line that's about feminism or equality. We just show women being awesome.
So if Minuet is the commander and Unknown is the fighter pilot, what do you do?
I'm an assassin.
Game developers like Wu are storytellers. She's also an engineer who has to solve technical problems to tell her story. Every developer has to decide how to spend the limited processing power of a smartphone or tablet.
Engineering is fundamentally a profession about trade-offs, right? So if I decide to make a very pretty explosion, I'm going to have to take away from something else. So what a lot of the male-dominated games in our field do is they make beautiful gunfire and explosions and particle effects and violence.
Wu noticed they skimp on things like the character's hair.
Typically, every woman you see is going to have a ponytail or an updo because the men that are making the games don't want to animate the hair. And, if you watch a Disney movie, the way that characters' hair moves and bounces, it's beautiful.
Wu's game has explosions too, but she wanted the women to be three-dimensional characters who can show nuanced emotions like sadness and sarcasm, and yes, well-animated hair. Wu has been outspoken about sexism in the male-dominated video game culture. She tweets and writes op-eds about it. When she began critiquing the industry, Wu and other women were targeted in a harassment campaign called Gamergate. Wu says trolls flooded her with negative tweets. She got death threats. Online attackers threatened to rape her. The harassment wasn't just online, it spilled over to the real world.
I'm coming to your house right now. I will slit your throat, you stupid little.
This is a voicemail she got. The FBI got involved, though the agents didn't find the people responsible. Wu says the harassment continues. For example, she had an incident just a few weeks ago in Boston.
My husband and I are at our new house, which we don't talk about the address with people, and someone had followed me around Boston, photographing me against my will, and then, sent me pictures saying basically, I know where you live, and then I woke up and found my window broken.
A few months ago, Wu decided that working for better representation of women and other marginalized groups means doing more than making nuanced female characters in video games. She's running for the US Congress in Massachusetts. She would use her technical understanding of cybersecurity and privacy to fight for consumers. But I had to ask her, she took on the game industry, which is mostly run by men. Congress is also overwhelmingly male, so in a way, she's trading one male-dominated industry for another.
Yes, it's exactly the same, right? Like it's a system that really favors men from a very specific background, straight, white, cisgender, and male. But I have to say, and this is sad, that I've encountered a fraction of the sexism I have in the game industry so far in being a congressional candidate. I think that really says something sad about the game industry when I can genuinely tell you this is a better place to be.
For The Pulse, I'm Alan Yu.
Coming up, inspiring the next generation of biologists.
When I started being interested in sharks, I think I was about 4 or 5, and I just really liked sharks because I pretty much liked any animal with sharp teeth.
Stay tuned to The Pulse. She's so cute!
Cancer Treatment Centers of America supports WHYY, offering clinically qualified cancer patients access to the American Society of Clinical Oncology's TAPER study on the effectiveness of new cancer drugs on specific tumor types. More at cancercenter.com. That's cancercenter.com.
This is The Pulse, stories about the people and places at the heart of health and science. I'm Mike and Scott. Our show today is about women in science, their work, and the challenges they face. When Regan Causey Tudor was in high school, her physics teacher told her she didn't have a brain for science.
And I had been told by my college calculus TA that I wasn't that smart, and I just felt that that was what I was.
So even though she had considered following in her dad's footsteps, he's a doctor, Tudor decided to study art history. A few months after graduation, she got married to her husband, Jeff. They had 3 kids, and she was a full-time mom for a while. She opened her own business, and life continued pretty happily at that. But then, when she was 37 years old, Tudor began to rethink what those teachers had told her. She decided she might have a brain for science after all, and that she wanted to be a doctor.
It was a little bit scary to take those initial science classes. I worked very hard in chemistry. The first course, I did every single problem in the college textbook, which is a lot of problems. And I loved that class so much because it's all problem solving, and there's never one answer how to get a result. And once I realized I was good at a class that to me had always been like the hardest class ever, the one that weeds out people from med school, it really made me think I could do it. When I started my post-bac, my son was in 1st grade and my girls were in 3rd and 5th grade, so they were very little. I had a rule already in my house that in 1st grade, kids had to start packing their own lunches, and I just would drag my huge backpack with all my textbooks to every soccer field, swimming pool, whatever they were doing. I was there with my books when I wasn't in school. I do feel that especially my girls were really inspired. I remember my oldest daughter in 5th grade being like, my mom's not home baking cookies. She's going to med school, girl power. You know, there's all this girl power and girls in STEM and all of this kind of stuff. And they were all for it. I think for Jeff, initially, it was really hard not to have me physically in the house. The house just exploded and got very messy. I don't know if anybody had realized how much I was constantly just picking up socks and jackets and shoes and keeping the dishes clean and things like that, that just happened in the background. He wasn't ever resentful, and I'm really grateful for that. I've had a lot of moments that were really amazing. When I was a 3rd year, I was really in the hospital for a lot of overnights. The first time we had a guy brought in who'd been shot 4 times. The resident there looked at me and could tell it was my first night on trauma. I had no idea what was going on. She said, you need to tell the OR they're coming. You need to go you need to get ready. You need to scrub. We need all hands on deck. And it was an operation that took the entire night, and he survived. And my job as the student was to check on him every night, every day, change his dressings, be there as he got better.
Now her time in medical school is nearly over, and recently Regan Causey-Tudor found out where she will be doing her residency. Here she is on Match Day. That's an annual orchestrated event where medical students from all over the country rip open envelopes at the same time that contain their fate.
Match Day is a big deal because you find out where you're going to train. Where you train really affects where you work after that, what kind of fellowships you have access to if you want to continue training. It's all about the people that you work with. It's really the culmination. I know graduation, I get the piece of paper that says an MD, but getting this job today means that I am going to be somebody's doctor.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Open up!
Jefferson! Mom, you love Jefferson.
I love Jefferson. How do you feel? I feel amazing. Like this, it just was felt from the second I interviewed there, like that was where I wanted to be, and those were my people. And it's just like, I can't believe it. Thank you.
That's Regan Causey-Tudor. She attends medical school at Temple University in Philadelphia, and now, at the age of 43, she's about to start her residency at Jefferson University Hospital. Alex Stern produced this piece. And by the way, one of Tudor's daughters, Sylvie, is 16 years old, and now she also wants to be a doctor someday. Here's what she says about her mom.
I'm so proud of her. She's such a badass.
This is The Pulse. I'm Mike and Scott. Our show is about badass women in science and health. And our next story is about a woman who's not a scientist herself, but she gets the word out about cool discoveries and scientific work that's happening, and she is a champion of women in STEM especially. Emily Grassley was an art student when she fell in love with natural history museums. First, she created art based on the objects she saw there, and then she started making videos. Now she hosts a wildly popular web series where she comes up with funny and creative ways to present science to a wider audience. Reporter Todd Bookman picks this story up from here.
That web series, The Brain Scoop, is now more than 140 episodes deep.
Welcome to my 350 million year old carboniferous forest.
In it, Grassley, who's 27, explores what happens behind the scenes at natural history museums, first in Montana and now at the Field Museum in Chicago, where she holds the title Chief Curiosity Correspondent. She produces short videos showcasing a strange species of fish or Amazonian tree, and all the research and work that goes into the exhibits. In this older episode, she's out in the field, trying to find a bear carcass.
In the middle of the road?
It's right here.
Could it be,
there it is.
right here?
Yep, that's it.
Found it! Found it! It's like Easter Sunday!
There should be more than...
Grassley brings the bones back to the lab, where she walks the audience through how they get cleaned and prepped for study or presentation. In fact, there are lots of bones and blood and guts on the Brain Scoop. None of it censored.
Woo, there we go. His throat. We just cut through the throat. This is all cartilage, and you can see bile. There's a little bit of bile matter in there.
She's gutting a wolf, and more than once nearly throws up during the process. But she doesn't quit or stop trying to educate.
Why do we demonize this kind of thing? Why do we call it gross? It's not gross, it's biology. And so I kind of dismissed that mentality that this was gross or wrong or bad in some kind of way and started trying to encourage other people to open their minds a little bit and think about the wonder and the beauty and the unlikelihood of natural life.
That sense of wonder has earned Grassley a huge legion of fans. Her videos get hundreds of thousands of views and receive high marks from big names in the field of science. Grassley is also a vocal champion of women in the STEM fields, and she hopes in inspiration for younger viewers to take up the sciences.
You know, maybe somebody watches our content and they're like, I didn't know that you could get a job studying millipedes.
Millipedes, dead wolves, whatever. Grassley is trying to open the door to all of the natural world, even the messy parts. For The Pulse, I'm Todd Bookman.
All right, cutting up stinky wolf carcasses is perhaps not everybody's way of getting interested in science. Wyoming ecologist and science communicator Kristen Gunther has a gentler and perhaps a little bit more refined approach: poetry. Let's listen to this sonnet she's written about stargazing with her dad in Maine. She says this is a reflection on how personal connection can influence our perception of nature.
Constellations. My father on the rocks at land's end heaves his hand to firmament, as if to sow its glinting stars like seeds cast in a field, and draw out splintered blooms, bright earth echoes. The stationed suns awake above the sea. These skeletons of myth he draws and names, map lines made quick between enormities. Entire worlds emerge from the skyways without his efforts. Though I keep his draws through heaven memorized, point to the flare a lighthouse sends against an island's hulk, illuminated briefly 2 breached whales, and all unsaid. Some things are given straight, some things must be imagined, others made.
That was the poem Constellations from Wyoming ecologist Kristen Gunther. Her specialty is translating new information for policymakers, ranchers, and other people who make decisions about how to use land. This is The Pulse. I'm Maiken Scott, and in the world of marine biology, there is a woman known as the Shark Lady. Her real name is Eugenie Clark. She was a pioneer in shark research, and she was one of the first female shark biologists. Here she is talking about an explorer she admired as a young woman, William Beebe.
And my parents would say, well, maybe you can study typing and how to be a good secretary, and you can become a secretary to somebody like William Beebe. That would be exciting, wouldn't it? And I said, no, I don't want to be anybody's secretary. I want to do that stuff myself. I want to be like William Beebe.
Eugenie Clark died a few years ago, but she continues to be an inspiration to many, including those who are part of the Gills Club. That's a group that connects young girls with female marine biologists. Shark biologist Heather Marshall is one of the founders of the Gills Club.
We're really just trying to create a community where these girls, if they have an interest in shark research or just STEM disciplines in general, they know that they're not alone, and they can kind of see the pathway forward if they decide to pursue such a career path.
I'm Lillian Peck, and I am 8 years old. I live on Cape Cod. I would like to be a marine biologist and study sharks. When I started being interested in sharks, I think I was about 4 or 5. And I just really liked sharks because I pretty much liked any animal with sharp teeth. When I was 5, we found out about the first meeting of Gills Club at the Natural History Museum in Brewster, and I really wanted to go. But we needed to be 8 years old to go, and I was only 5. So my mom told the leader of the Gills Club, and she said that if I was really interested in sharks, I could still go anyways, even if I wasn't 8. The first meeting, we did a dissection, which means we got to open up a shark. Like, we got to cut it open and see what it was like eating. I thought it was really interesting. Like, it was the first time I did something like that. It smelled kind of like rotten fish a little. It wasn't that bad.
Once I began looking into this career, one of the first scientists that I got to know was a woman named Dr. Eugenie Clark. And she is an incredibly inspirational, pioneer in the shark research world and is inspiring to male and female scientists alike. And, when I first started thinking about this career, my mom got me the book, The Lady and the Sharks by Dr. Eugenie Clark. And, obviously I was initially just captivated by the fact that it was a woman doing this research. And then, she really is a pioneer in shark research. She began doing her work in the 1950s. She founded Mote Marine Laboratory and just had an absolutely incredible career. So Dr. Eugenie Clark was actually featured on the Gills Club before she passed away. Less than a year before she passed away. She passed away, sadly, in 2015. But we reached out to her and we told her about the Gills Club. Even her older age, and at that point she was, pretty sick a lot of the time, she still took time to share her experience and words of wisdom with the Gills. So having her, share that part of herself was very significant and very exciting for all of us. We've had feedback from parents and Gills Club members, expressing that being a part of the Gills Club has helped them see that their love and interest in sharks is acceptable, it's okay, it's not just for boys. Many of our members told us in the beginning, we've been told that sharks are for boys, by kids at school. And now they see that they're a part of a community of their peers. And, this passion and excitement that they have is okay.
It will help me be a marine biologist, and it'll help me be educated first so I can be better at my job.
That was 8-year-old Lillian Peck and marine biologist Heather Marshall talking about Gills Club. That's an educational initiative from the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. Paige Flager produced this story. And to finish out our show on women in science, I have to give a shout out to the Bearded Lady Project. It's a documentary that celebrates women in science, particularly paleontology. The Bearded Lady Project also includes a series of portraits of female scientists in the field, and they're all wearing fake beards, defying the stereotype that paleontologists are men. The film is starting to tour the country, and we've put a link and some of the pictures up on our Facebook page. That's our show for this week. The Pulse is a production of WHYY in Philadelphia. Our health and science reporters are Alana Gordon, Irina Zhorov, Elizabeth Fiedler, and Alan Yu. We had help producing this week's show from Alex Stern. Charlie Kyer is our engineer, Paige Flager, our associate producer, Tanya English is the managing editor, and Megan Pinto, our executive producer. I'm Mike and Scott. Thank you for listening. Next time on The Pulse...
This is the American Health Care Act.
Health insurance in America is in transition, and with that, many people are worried about one thing in particular.
Raise your hand if you think you have a pre-existing condition.
Pre-existing conditions. A lot has changed under the Affordable Care Act. What will happen next? Don't miss that episode of The Pulse. You can find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.
Behavioral health reporting on The Pulse is supported by the Thomas Scattergood Behavioral Health Foundation, an organization that is committed to supporting innovative approaches in integrated healthcare.
Penn Medicine's Transplant Institute supports WHYY. Penn has been performing kidney, liver, heart, lung, and pancreas transplants for more than 50 years. Penn offers advanced options to help decrease wait times and improve outcomes. Learn more about all the options to help patients live and thrive at pennmedicine.org/transplant or 800-789-PENN. Because your life is worth Penn Medicine. Independence Blue Cross supports WHYY's The Pulse. Independence is coming to your neighborhood to help you understand healthcare options. Licensed agents can help prepare you for whatever may be ahead. Learn more at ibx.com/events. Independence Blue Cross. Live fearless. Ben Franklin Technology Partners of Southeastern Pennsylvania supports WHYY's The Pulse and are partners with a purpose, providing capital, counsel, and connections to technology entrepreneurs and investors in the greater Philadelphia area. More about Ben at partnerswithapurpose.org.